Hello. So for this video, I'm going to focus on, the sun's changing, on the NICU, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. Basically what it's like or what my experience was when my daughter was there. And then probably maybe a different video I'll talk more about my daughter's specific journey, I guess, like how she developed and what issues she had and how she's doing now. And the last video I did was about my pregnancy. So quick recap, my daughter was born at 27 weeks and 5 days because of incompetent cervix, my incompetent cervix. So the first word I would use to describe the NICU environment, which I think probably applies in general to, being in the hospital, being in a hospital, especially an intensive care unit, is overstimulating. There's so much going on, there's so much noise, there's so many professionals. So that's definitely one of the first things I noticed, is that it's just like a lot. Like, it's not a place where you have privacy, it's not a place where you can relax, it's not a place where you can sleep easily, because there's just so much going on. We were lucky, the hospital my daughter was in had private rooms, which I've heard a lot of other NICUs are like a big open area with all the babies and all the workers and the parents all milling around at once, which sounds horrible to me. Though apparently one advantage of that is it's easier to meet the other parents and get to know them and socialize, whereas where I was, everyone kind of stuck to themselves, went straight to their kids' room and then didn't really talk to anyone else. Though I did go to a few parent events, so I met a few along the way, but my daughter was there for a long time, so we outlasted everyone. So just to give you an idea, because my daughter was born as early as she was, at that age they need to be in a dark room. Like, they can't be in a room with a window and light. So she had a very small room that was dark right near the front reception. Like, I could see the reception from, where I sat, which could be loud at times. And there's lots of machines, there's lots of beeping. Like, one big thing was, at that age, a baby can't breathe on their own yet. The lungs aren't developed, they're not mature. So she had stickers on her chest to measure her breathing and her oxygen saturation, I believe. And it's normal for there to be moments where they're not breathing well enough, that they're not getting enough oxygen. And so when that happens, an alarm goes off, it starts dinging, and a light flashes. I believe it was orange, and then if it really goes on too long, or if it dips too low, then it starts ringing really fast and loud, and there's a red light. So I remember I never really got used to it, but it got easier. But at first it was extremely overwhelming, because it took me a while to understand that it felt like it was an emergency, but usually it wasn't. It was just a normal thing that happened a lot during the day. But at first it was very stressful. And another thing I should say is they're not closed rooms. There's windows, so every room you walk by you can look in and basically see everything that's going on. There was a sliding door, but usually they kept them open so the nurse could come in and out more easily. And also how it worked was ideally there was one nurse assigned to the baby depending on how complex the needs were. So I think at first she usually just, the nurse only had my daughter, but sometimes there would be two, they would have two babies to take care of at once. Um, and yeah, and again for the noise, um, you know, since it's so open, like if there's something going on next door, like there's alarms going off, you can hear. It's just a lot. And so in terms of noises, there was the ringing from the oxygen desaturation. She also had something called CPAP, which you might have heard of before because it's used for sleep apnea, I believe. So it's basically just a machine with water in it and bubbles, and the baby has to wear a kind of little mask, and air is blown into their lungs to keep them open. So that machine is kind of loud too, and there's lots of like bubbly water sounds. Also early on, the baby can't regulate their temperature, so she had to have a probe under her armpit for that. And if her temperature, like it got too hot in her incubator, oh yeah, she was in an incubator. If it got too hot or too cold in there, like that would beep as well. That would go off. What else did she have? And she also had to be fed through a tube. Which when she was very, very little, like first born, it was through her belly button. And then later it was a tube that, well, then it went down her mouth, and then later when she was older and didn't have the oxygen mask, then it went down her nose. And so that would beep as well when the milk was almost finished, and then when it was finished, it would just beep nonstop until the nurse came. And sometimes, she'd be on break or whatever, and it would take a really long time. So lots of noises, lots of professionals constantly in and out of the room. That was something I found very, I don't know, I guess frustrating sometimes. People just walk in and out of the room all the time. There's the nurse, doctors, there was, what was it, RTs, respiratory therapists. There was the person that came in to empty the garbage. There's someone that would come in to clean. There's someone that would come in to like replenish, the syringes or like whatever the tools were. There was a social worker that would come in. There was a music therapist. There was an occupational therapist. And then there was all like the more specialty things, like if my daughter needed her eye test or hearing test. What else? X-rays. She had ultrasounds. She also had like ear, nose, and throat specialist doctor come in. So just like constant in and out of the room. And I would find that, oh yeah, there was also a lactation consultants that would come in. All, important, aspects to like her care. But it was a lot. Like, there could be like a 3-hour span where there was just constantly someone in and out of the room. So it was very exhausting. And I really tried to be, pleasant as much as I could. And I think a lot of them liked me because of that. People pleasing. But it was exhausting. And then sometimes there were nurses that really liked my daughter who wanted to come see how she was doing, which was really nice. But sometimes it would just be like, oh my God, just leave me alone with her for 2 minutes. And also I was pumping my milk. Luckily I got a scarf that like had a head hole, and so it was easy to cover myself, but sometimes I found it was a bit much. But again, everyone was really nice most of the time, but there's definitely, like they're there, they have limited time, they have to do their job. So sometimes I would wish that, I don't know, they were a little more aware of, how they came in and like asking specifically if now was a good time. Though oftentimes there wasn't really a choice. Like now was the time they had, so they had to do it. Um, but like there were certain days where my daughter had a lot of procedures all in the same day, and like we agreed to be in a study for her heart, and like the ultrasound technician came in after she just had like three painful things and had her blood taken and had something shoved down her nose and just fell asleep. And then they would come and want to do their thing. And a few times they would agree to come back later, but oftentimes they'd kind of be like, well, it's now or never. We have to do it now. So that I found hard sometimes. What else? When she was very little, they had every 3 hours they did her care, which meant changing her diaper. What else? Changing the sticker that she had to keep the breathing mask on. Massaging her head because she had to wear like a really tight hat for the mask to attach to with Velcro. So it kind of makes their heads kind of like long and thin until they don't wear it anymore. We take the hat off and give her a little head massage. She really liked that. And then just do whatever needed to be done, like change her stickers if they were getting kind of old and coming off. And that was every 3 hours, because when they're young like that, you don't want to be moving them too much, but you want to be taking care of their needs. So I would always try to make sure I wanted to be there and participate, because when she was really small, I couldn't hold her all the time, and so sometimes that was the only thing that I could do, because she slept pretty much constantly, because again, at that age, she's not supposed to be out and in the world and awake. She's supposed to be like this in the womb. And how it works was, which I think again, many hospitals it's like this, but every day they had rounds, usually in the morning, where it would be like a whole slew of professionals would come rolling up to the door, and if I was there, I would like come stand in the door and participate. And like every week there would be a new doctor responsible for that section, so it was usually the same doctor every single day, and then a bunch of different professionals, usually a lot of students, and then the nurse, my daughter's nurse, would kind of give like the lowdown on how she was doing and what had happened during the night and any test results, and they would just basically discuss the plan, and the doctor would do a lot of like teaching to the students. So the faces would change constantly. One thing I noticed and found confusing and difficult was like the opinions, the plans, the opinions of the different professionals. It was just constantly changing, which is okay. Like it's like normal. Like logically, I understand that, especially with the doctor changing every week. Like different doctors would come and have kind of different visions and different approaches. But it would be like I had a notebook and I would take notes during the rounds every day just to try to make sense of what was going on and keeping up. But like sometimes literally the day before they would have said, okay, like this is what we think is going on and this is what we're gonna do, and then the next day they would come and they would say something completely different, and I would be like, oh well, what about what you said yesterday? And literally like 12 sets of eyes would be on me, like complete confusion, like as if as if it never happened, which I guess they forgot, or times change, I guess. But I remember that would be something I would notice sometimes. It would be like, what is the plan? But I remember they said that they kind of would do that, like purposely made it so that there were a lot of different professionals involved constantly, just to keep fresh eyes and to keep, you know, any one professional from thinking, you know, they knew everything, I guess, or getting too like stuck in one approach, because, you know, premature babies or babies with, you know, illnesses or conditions, like, it's so complicated and there's so many different factors. So it's good to have lots of different brains involved, but, you know, for the parent it can be pretty confusing. And another thing, that's part of life as a NICU parent, is just the procedures, like the constant things that they were doing for testing or what treatment. Like, my daughter had so many blood tests, which was like a prick in the bottom of her foot. I'm getting emotional. There was just, I just remember, like, oftentimes they would put a Band-Aid on and it would bleed through the Band-Aid. It's not even that big of a deal, but I would just remember coming in and seeing blood on her little onesie when she was able to wear clothes. That took a few months, but just seeing, it just wasn't fun. Like, they took blood tests often, especially when she was younger, just to check her levels of different things to get this is all very technical, just to make sure that everything was okay, or to, you know, that type of thing. Definitely the worst, this is gonna make me emotional too, but definitely the worst thing were the eye exams, which they had to do regularly because of, I think it was when a baby receives oxygen to help them breathe, which my daughter didn't need all the time, but sometimes she would if she was really having trouble breathing. They would have to give her a little extra oxygen to help her. So they have to keep a close eye on how their eyes are developing, because high levels of oxygen over, you know, a certain period of time can affect their sight. So I forget how often, but regularly this team would come and they would have to check her eyes. But the thing was, they had to check like behind her eye. So they had to use a machine that would, or like a tool that would basically hold open her eyelids, which I still feel guilty about, but I never stayed for that. The reason was, a bunch of the nurses told me not to, because it's kind of graphic for a parent to see. And obviously they said it's not like painful, but it's not comfortable. And so the babies would, you know, scream their heads off during this. So I still, like I said, I still feel guilty that I didn't stay with her for those eye exams, but the nurse would always be there to comfort, which isn't the same, I know, because the nurse isn't the parent. But I think after the first one, the music therapist got involved, and she agreed to be there in my place when they did these things, and she had a very comforting presence, and she would make different noises that preemies like. So after the first time, every single time, she would be there with her, and I would go like down the hall. But I remember the first time I saw her after the eye exam, I lost it because her, like, you could see the marks on her eyelids, and her little eyes were all swollen. And when she was younger too, she would get so upset. It didn't last long, it was like a minute, but she would get so upset during it that she would just pass out after. Like, she'd be exhausted from from the whole process. So when she eventually got old enough and she didn't need them anymore, I was very happy. Um, Other things that she got were she got a lot of x-rays and a lot of ultrasounds. I forget why now. There were a lot of reasons, but those were frequent visitors, and those were also really not fun. Like, basically all of these things are uncomfortable and the baby cries, and you have to be there to try to comfort them as best that you can through it. Everything besides the eye exams I was always there for. And only one time did she needed to get a MRI, which was not in her room. She had to be taken elsewhere. And before they said, I remember, oh, most babies, we put them in this like tight little pillow thing and they really like it and they fall asleep. But of course, not my daughter. She was not happy. She was super upset, so they had to sedate her. And I remember when she came back, she was all like limp and sedated, and that was quite upsetting. But anyway, all that to say, definitely a huge challenge is seeing your baby in pain, and pretty much every day they have to do stuff, like even just the feeding tube that would go down her nose. It wasn't pleasant. I wouldn't like someone shoving a tube down my nose, and so pretty often they would have to change the tube, or sometimes, especially as she got older, she would rip it out and then they'd have to put it back in. But that's definitely, I found that extremely painful at times. But all I could do was try to be there for her through it. And the other thing, well, this is coming off all very negative, but to be very honest, it's horrible. Like, it's not a fun experience. No one wants to be in the NICU with their premature baby or sick baby. They tried to do certain things to make it more pleasant, like occasional activities, but it wasn't very often. Like, my daughter was there 5.5 months, and I think there were like 2, maybe 3, which is better than nothing. One thing that they did that I really liked was once a month a massage therapist would come, and you'd get a 15-minute massage. So I was always stalking the area where the sign-up sheet would appear once a month, and I think 5 months in a row I got one, and I really enjoyed that. But I would say another difficult part of the NICU is would be leaving at the end of the day. Like, I've online and on Facebook, I've seen moms say that they stayed the night there. Maybe that would be doable if it was a short-term stay. Like, I don't know how it is in other places, but it was just like, there's no way I could sleep there. It's so loud. There's so much going on. So normally what I would do is I would be there from about 9:30 in the morning till usually 6:30ish, and then I would go home. A few times we ended up coming back later in the evening to visit. Oh my god, my foot is asleep. Hold on. So yeah, 9:30 to 6:30. So how long is that? Usually 9 hours. I would be there, and but I think almost every single day when I left, I sobbed. It was just so hard to leave her. I just felt I would feel really bad leaving her. I felt like a bad mom. But on the other hand, and everyone was very good about kind of encouraging you to take care of yourself and try to rest, because they know that it's a hard environment for parents, and you can easily burn out. But So I knew like I had um, to go, especially because I was pumping every 3 hours. So it's not like I was getting a nice full night of sleep every night. I was getting up every 3 hours. Um, but it was just really hard to leave her. A lot of guilt. And I remember a lot of nurses would offer, if you're worried or if you want to know how she's doing, just call. You can call anytime during the night, and we'll give you an update. To be honest, I didn't really do that ever unless there was a specific reason. But honestly, the easiest way for me and for my boyfriend too to cope would be like to go home and to just shut my brain off and try not to think about her as much as possible, because it was too hard otherwise. And also I knew that if there was anything anything dangerous or whatever, they would call, and they would call us immediately and let us know. So as long as we weren't getting a call, I knew she was okay. But it was hard to leave her and not know who was with her, because it was a different nurse at night, and a lot of guilt. Especially I remember Christmas Eve was hard for me as well. So those are the main things that I can think of about the NICU, about what it was like. There was also, the last 10 days of her stay actually was not in the NICU. It was in like a regular ward. That was a whole other thing. That if anyone's interested, I could make a video on that. That was probably one of the hardest parts, was that 10-day period when she was in the regular ward, because there they don't have the same intensity of care. Like the nurses have so many patients, so like I lived with her for those 10 days in the hospital, and it was beyond exhausting. But it was like the end of the road. Like I knew it was imminent that she would be coming home during that period, but we didn't know when yet. Oh, which actually reminds me, a huge aspect to, having a baby in the NICU is like just the unknown. You don't know how long like everything's gonna take. You don't know how long it's gonna take for them to, develop this thing, like how long it's gonna take for them to learn to breathe on their own, to regulate their temperature on their own, to be able to eat on their own. If they have any like illnesses or like, what's the word? If there's anything wrong, you don't know if and when it's going to get better, and no one can tell you, like, of course, they can't read the future. So that's a big thing, and I've heard a lot of people say that they didn't like when people would ask, well, when's your baby coming home? Because they didn't know. I don't remember being that bothered by the question, though sometimes, like, my mom would be a little insistent about, well, but when? But it'd be like, I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. It depends on her, on how she does, and on different factors, so I have no clue. But I don't know, there's something to be said that I found most of the professionals we came across, very nice and very professional, and even despite that, it was still hell. So there's just no getting around, the difficulty of the situation. That does remind me, though, one of the pet peeves I would have with like staff, I guess, would be, well, one was when there was kind of a lack of awareness of what the experience was like for me. That happened pretty often to different levels, but I remember one that really affected me was at one point I got a sinus infection, and I think within the first month of after she was born, maybe because of the stress and exhaustion. So during that time, pre-COVID, I had to wear a mask when I was with my daughter, and I washed my hands a lot. So I was on that before everyone else, sort of. But I remember there was one day we had this nurse, and she was a little odd, maybe social skills not the best. But my boyfriend was there, and he was holding Olive, my daughter, and like I mentioned, the breathing and having, like, if she wasn't breathing well enough, the alarms would go off. My boyfriend was holding her, and us who had known her for a good month at this point, nothing was out of the ordinary. Like, that's how it always was with her. But this nurse became convinced that something was wrong, and she insisted that my boyfriend not hold her anymore. So he held her for like 20 minutes instead of an hour and a half. And then she ordered all these tests, which was fine. It's okay to make sure everything was okay. But she made like an offhand comment to me saying like, "Oh, I hope she doesn't have what you have." And that like caused me to hysterically cry for I don't even know how long after, because constantly they would be telling us how dangerous it was for her if she were to get a cold or if she were to get sick because of her fragile lungs. So I kind of wish she hadn't like flippantly suggested something so like serious to me, like that my daughter her life could be in danger, but also that it could be my fault, when she had no evidence for this. It turns out she was fine, like as we had thought at the beginning. It was just that she didn't know my daughter, and so she got anxious. So anyway, that's just one, like that would happen sometimes where, they would make comments without realizing, the impact it could have. But again, not all the time, like nothing crazy, but here and there. And another pet peeve I would have was there was like a select group of nurses that were quite anxious, controlling types, which probably it was like a butting head situation, because that's kind of how I am as well. But what I mean is they would be controlling about things that like it didn't matter. Like there was one nurse who was I considered kind of the worst, but at some point, like for a month and a half, I'd been holding my daughter, and I'd put a little blanket on her while I held her, and everything was fine. Like she had a probe to check her temperature, but one day I had this nurse, and she thought the blanket was making her too hot, even though the probe wasn't going off. Like there was no issue, and she was really insistent, so I was like, fine, whatever. I took the blanket off, and then the next day I had a different nurse, and I held my daughter, and I put the blanket on again like I had done every other time that no other nurse had an issue with. And it just so happened that my nurse went on break, and the nurse from the day before was replacing her. And she came in, as soon as she saw the blanket, she was like... And then she made a comment about the blanket again, and I remember we had like a 30-second stare down standoff where I just looked at her, as if to say, and so she let it go. But it would just be things like this, like, just like controlling, like telling me I wasn't putting the diaper on right. But actually that was the same nurse again. She had like a specific way she put on the diaper, and it would just be like, it's my baby, it's my like only time during the day to take care of my child, and you're, I'm not giving good examples, but it was just stuff like that but that might be partially just me and how I am. I'm someone who I really need my space and I appreciate my space. So having, people around kind of telling me what to do and what not to do when it's like a personal preference thing, I would find that aggravating. And I probably also wasn't, at my very best in terms of patience. But that's everything I can think of for now. If you have any specific questions or if you have an experience and you want to let me know, please do. And yeah, thank you for listening. Bye.